We have a really interesting panel discussion lined up on board and security governance. I'll invite the panelists over now. We have Mr. Ramchandra Kulkarni, who looks at the technology risk division at Goldman Sachs. Mr. Ramchandra, if you could join us on stage. We also have Mr. Animesh Chauhan, who is the district manager for financial services at Palo Alto Networks. We have Mr. Samir Aksekar, who's the cybersecurity director at the EQT Group. Mr. Steve D'Souza, who is the chief risk officer for ICICI Bank. And Mr. Shiv Kumar Pandey, who's the group CISO for Adani Group. Thank you to all the panelists for joining us for this discussion. Mr. Ramchandra, over to you.
Couple of things in terms of introduction, what we will talk today in terms of how, I think we have heard Samir speak just a few minutes back in terms of the complexity of the new risks that are emerging and how do organizations deal with it. And when we are looking at technology cycles, what used to be 7, 8, maybe in certain cases 10 years of technology generation has now become 3 to 5 years. So in terms of your adaptability, your speed with which you need to respond to changes, that has changed again. So in that context, keeping up with the whole technology landscape, the associated risks becomes an increasing challenge for all the firms. And obviously, as an oversight, the board becomes an important factor for the board of directors as well. So in terms of this particular session, we are going to be talking about a few things which are responsibilities of the board, what typically works, what are the effective things, and I have my colleagues here who will shed light on some of those things. While there is no specific in terms of regulation, cyber security regulation in financial services, but there is obviously when we start a bit earlier in 2000s, we have an IT Act, and then we have sectoral, fairly in-depth regulations, either by RBI, SEBI, on various domains. So with that a bit of context, I'll probably have my first question to my colleagues here. When we look at board member responsibility, there are essentially three things that happens. One is understand. So how do board members understand what is relevant, what is the regulatory landscape, what you need to do, and how do we equip yourself? That is the understand part. And then is the engage part. So once you have understood, how do you engage with cyber risk management in terms of influencing various things, making sure whatever is the expectation from the regulations are met. And then the last one is the monitor part. On an ongoing basis, how do you make sure whatever is the spirit of the regulations, whatever is the spirit in terms of risk management is on the ground on a continual basis. So that is what typically happens. Obviously, there are various flavors of this, but principal things for a board member is understand, engage, and monitor. So those would be the three things. So when we look at understand, so the first thing probably I'll ask Animesh, in terms of your role as a board member, how do you understand what are the things that will allow you to understand these are the 3 things, 5 things that as a board member I'm responsible for?
Surely, thanks Ram for that. Firstly, coming to the basics, the board member is there to ensure that shareholders' values are delivered. Now, to ensure they do that, technology plays a pivotal role, right? So technology adoption, and along with technology adoption comes the cyber risk part of it, which is very, very critical and important. So as a board member, understanding the cyber risk becomes a very, very important and critical part. Otherwise, your growth in terms of technology will be really slow. The basic premise, I would say, is of course that we all understand is on the governance part of it. There are guidelines depending on what industry you are in. In FSI, you have a lot of regulations, so that forms one basic guideline. Those are guardrails, but I would say cybersecurity is much more than just following the compliances. but it's essential. That's where the basic stuff starts. And then you have the risk assessment part of it, which is critical, which as a board member, you get a view of it, of what the risk that you're carrying with the new technology that is coming in, and how do you, and you have to take the direction to ensure that that risk is covered from a cybersecurity perspective. And of course, the compliances. You are in an industry, you have to ensure that the compliances are there. So that's how I see how the board members should.
Anything, any of you want to add to that? How do you look at responsibilities of board members? How does one know what are the 3 things, 5 things that you are principally responsible for?
Well, I think from a responsibility of the board member, I'll use the cyber lens, correct? And as board members, you're aware about your business processes, you're aware about what's the business model that is there. So from a cyber perspective, I would just ask them to see how you view it from a cyber lens in terms of what can go wrong with my business processes, correct? They understand their business processes, so if there is a cyber attack, what can go wrong, correct? What happens once it goes wrong? Are we ready to handle an outage of this type, correct? Have we practiced handling these type of scenarios, correct? Is my cyber strategy linked to my business priorities? So I think when you start to have these type of questions and when you have these type of insight sessions with your management and with the security team, I think it will help the board members better understand where we are and what needs to be done to address it. Ram?
Thanks. I mean, I know you are in with a private equity company which has multiple portfolio companies, and you kind of advise on cybersecurity of that. In terms of how do board members actually equip themselves to perform their responsibility? We spoke about what should be their responsibilities, but what tools, what mechanisms that they use to kind of be abreast of what is happening, and what are the mechanisms by which they equip themselves to perform their duties?
Well, there are a few ways you can go about it, correct? One is absolutely interacting with the management, and in this case, the CISO. So definitely understanding with them what strategy do we have in place, correct? How is it linked to the business objectives? So that will help them gain that insight. Another one is at a board composition level, do you have advisors who are advising you on these specific domains, correct? A lot of board have advisors who can come in and advise as to what is happening in the industry, provide thought leadership access on that front. Another way to do it is you may have independent directors on the board. Based on you're a private or a public company, you may have independent directors. They again can bring that skill to the board. So drives effectiveness of the board. Another way you can look at this is boils down to your own learning ability, correct? In this age of AI where we have to constantly upskill, as a board of director as well, I have to keep upskilling, correct? We are talking around learning programs. Earlier used to be for technical stuff. Now we are talking about learning journeys for board of directors as well. So they are also coming into this mix when they have to keep learning for them to govern effectively. So I think, and then you add conferences like this, you add conferences of NASSCOM, premier conferences across the country. You have publications like the Institute of Directors who have numerous magazines and special insights that come out where it talks around, gives a view of various boards, as well as industrial advisors, as well as independent directors who come and give insights. So I think there are a few mechanisms available, but it really boils down to knowing your business well and having numerous insight sessions with your management team, is the way I would put it.
So please, Steve, next I'll come to you. In terms of just the ever-evolving risk landscape, I mean, every 6 months to 12 months, we have a new plethora of risks coming. As a board member, if you have to govern and govern effectively, how do you keep up, what would be the best way to keep up with all the things in terms of new risk, new technologies, the organization limitations in terms of resourcing? So what are the mechanisms that typically are used in terms of keeping up with the understanding part?
I think in today's world, I think there is an interconnectedness among various elements of risk, right? It's just not cyber. There are instances of pandemic. There is the regulatory landscape. There is geopolitical tensions, obviously changing technology. All of this intersect at some point and define the risk posture of the organization. Just not. If you look at from a cyber angle, I won't say emerging technology now, I would say evolution of emerging technology, right? The way AI, quantum computing, it's important to understand what is the impact that it is having on the organization, just not from a business perspective, not from a productivity or competitive edge per se, but also to understand how adversaries are using these technologies to target organizations, target the industries as large, right? And we obviously, everybody's looking at how AI in itself, which is the latest technology, is being misused by adversary, and the latest deepfake menace that is happening, and organization as well as society at large is being impacted, right? Now to keep abreast with this evolving landscape, I think, some things like, primarily the cybersecurity surveys, reports by leading organizations. You've got the Gartners, Forresters, McKinsey's, they come up with some real good content, which gives you probably a 360-degree view of not only the technology, but what is the adoption of it across various sectors, right? The conferences, Samir spoke about conferences. There are global conferences like Asia Risk, Congress, Risk World, so many conferences in India with the digital publications that you have. You have the ET group, we have the ASEI itself conducting more than 2 or 3 conferences throughout the year. For me, apart from all of this, I think there are 2 important elements. One is the regulatory landscape. We're seeing that has changed, and the frameworks as well. We've got, this year itself, we've got the NIST 2.0, which is released, a different flavor too. An evolution of cloud security per se. All the regulators are coming up with, regulations and guidelines specific on AI security. We've seen the privacy wave globally, and now that's going to hit India. All of this, understanding all of this is very, very important for the board member. Only then he'll be able to understand the objectives they're talking about. Over and above this, I would say having boardroom workshops is very, very important, because the organization itself would be undergoing a transformation, whether it's a digital transformation, SOC transformation, mergers and acquisitions, so many other. Having the leadership and the subject matter experts, having curated workshops for the board in explaining what exactly is the organization doing, how are they moving towards all of these initiatives, as well as having consultants and experts coming and talking about technologies like AI and the others. I think doing a combination of all of this and reaching out to the right stakeholders, using the right resources is the only way that board members can keep abreast of the changing landscape.
Agree more. Just from our experience, to the point of board engagement, we do the same kind of exercise with the board, where we look at scenario-based thing. If there is a ransomware attack, if there is a demand, and these are the 3 regulations that you need to adhere to at the same time. So as board of directors who are kind of aligned to cyber, what would you do? What are the 3 steps that you would be required to do? And from a globally, US has this regulation on ransomware payment in terms of when you make a payment, what you need to do in terms of disclosure. So how do you do that disclosure? What is the reputational risk? So we actually run multiple drills around how this needs to happen. It's a very, very valid point. Probably I'll go to the engage part from understand part. So when you look at engage, probably I'll stay with Steve in terms of engaging. Samir mentioned that one of the things of understanding more is to kind of talk to the people within the firm at various levels to just gauge understanding of the risk posture, what is happening. But are there any 3 or 4 things that you would do as part of effective engaging of the firm's management?
Board obviously defines and establishes the culture which is then adopted in the organization, right? I believe it's a top-down approach. We all know that, whether it's board or the senior leadership, and it starts from the policies, the board-driven policies per se, right? To ensuring that you have the relevant board-approved policies, whether it is on cybersecurity, data protection, third-party governance. I think it starts from there, right? That eventually defines how the organization is going to turn up in addressing cyber risk per se. Over and above that, I would say having a well-defined cybersecurity strategy in itself. Not looking at cyber risk standalone, but ensuring that it is part of, it is looked at as any other business risk, as integrated as part of the overall risk management framework of the organization. That's very, very important. You can have your strategy mapped to any of the global frameworks, whether it's NIST, MITRE, whatever, and ensuring that, the organization has carried out a thorough risk assessment, doing as-is mapping and knowing what direction do you move to, right? You need to have your 6 months, 1 year, 2 year roadmap that is there, which is blessed by the board itself and obviously looked at on a more frequent basis. Third element is budget allocation, right? There's a very popular meme that's there, right, which depicts two jars. One jar says before a breach, which is almost half empty, and the second jar is post breach, which is almost full, right? So ensuring that budget allocation at the right time for new technologies, for right resources and all is done, very, very important. We spoke about the regulatory landscape, right? You have DPDP coming up in India. Everybody's talking about the penalties, the AI wave that's going on. Ensuring that the organization is prepared for this. We know what has happened in the recent past with some of major organizations, regulators like RBI. It's not about only a penalty, but pulling out businesses, right, have long-lasting implications per se. And lastly, and most importantly, I would say, is building a culture of communication, because that's very, very important. Fostering that open communication platform between the senior leadership, the board, and the CISO and the IT organization, very, very important. Because otherwise, it would tend to be a more checklist-based reporting, right? You don't want that to happen. So how do you engage with the CISO and the CISO organization and the rest of the organization to build that culture of openness, being transparent on, what are the, implications, what are you seeing in terms of different assessments, regulatory compliance and others, and how are you really working together and, defining that security dashboard, whether you want to call it a security dashboard, reporting dashboard, defining that for the organization, I think is very, very important.
No, agree. Yeah, please.
I'll just add in, there is wonderful points touched, correct? Culture is so key. An area I would like to also expand is the composition of the board, correct? And the effectiveness is by the chair as well. The chair has a very important responsibility into what type of topics you pull into the board. What is given priority, what is given, amount of time given to a particular agenda item is absolutely key. So the chair plays an absolutely important role. So that is one. And then how frequently is cyber brought to the board? Correct? How frequently is that topic, the type of topics that come to the board as well. So that also influences the level of knowledge that the board would have on cyber. So we just wanted to add it.
No, absolutely, correct. One of the other things, it's just an extension of what both of you spoke, is in terms of responsibility of a cyber-aligned board member is to make sure you obviously understand what are the risks, but also make sure you're the champion for the cyber team within the board in terms of whether you have the right technologies, whether you have the right organization structure, whether you have the right resourcing. You are the person who is going to be batting for the cyber team within the board. So, probably I'll come to Animesh in terms of what would be your perspective in terms of what is the 2 or 3 ways in which you can influence all these things in terms of technology, in terms of resourcing, as well as putting structures. You are making the right difference and making the right call within the organization as a board member.
Surely. So as already mentioned, Steve was mentioning and Samir did add to it. As a board member, you're aware what your business objectives are. At the same time, you should also be aware what the risk is. And from a risk perspective, when I say that, I mean, what is your standing today on a risk platform? Where is the endpoint? Where do you want to reach? And the journey, right? These milestones are very, very critical. And as a board member, those regular updates on those milestones are very critical to ensure that your journey is going well. Well, 3 important things that I see. One, of course, the processes, right? The process is very, very critical. The process shouldn't be, of course, people dependent, and these processes have to be regularly updated and checked because we already established that the threat landscape is changing, the kind of attacks are changing, so your processes have to adhere to them, right? So we need to relook at the processes at regular intervals and see that we work on them. People play a very, very critical role in overall things because that's the connect between your process and your technology. So regular trainings for people, they understanding, firstly, do they understand what's the vision that the board is setting for the organization, how risk is or cybersecurity is going to play a role in it, what is their individual role, and what is their role as a team together. Now these things, I think Steve was mentioning the communication part of it, right? That communication going down the line, that what important role they play is very, very critical from a people perspective. As a board, you also need to ensure that, of course, the teams are trained, updated to the latest trends and technology so that they're ready to face what's going on. And thirdly, technology, of course, that's your armory to the defense that can happen. So look at that. I mean, you already have a CISO organization which is helping you pick the right technology and choose. And of course, you give them that leeway and the budgets to ensure that they are properly stacked. That's how I see it.
Yeah, Samir, just on one specific thing in terms of what we spoke, in terms of talent. I mean, how would board members kind of participate that identification of the right senior talent from a cyber point of view? What would typically their responsibilities are? I know you are engaged in some of these as we speak, but as a natural process, what would be the 2 or 3 things that they will be looking at on a constant basis in terms of talent?
Well, and again, adding from a security lens, correct?
Yeah, security lens.
You want someone who understands the business, correct? As a board member, my first ask of the leader is someone who understands the business, because then I can wrap the controls around it, correct? Someone who talks and enables a discussion on risks with the board members, with the leadership, correct? Conveys things not in terms of number of vulnerabilities, but in terms of business processes and what can go wrong with the business process if I don't particularly handle this anomaly. So I'm looking for someone who has the business knowledge, can talk in terms of cyber risk, and ultimately is a leader who can bubble things up, who can make connections, and is not afraid. It's not someone who keeps sugarcoating, because in cybersecurity, you have to put the truth out there. How you put it in a business lens, you put it in a manner that the board can understand, and you communicate it effectively. I think that's what stands out as 3 distinct qualities when I look at hiring a CISO at a board.
I'll just like to add, I think apart from this, from business perspective, it's also important to have a very, we've seen probably organization because of a regulatory mandate, you need a CISO and just make anybody a CISO, right? It doesn't work that way for a long term. I think it's over the news in the last 1 week, a very large organization in the US has appointed somebody as a CISO who really did not have any technical background, and then eventually now they are, the organization has been penalized. So it's also important to have somebody who understands business, technology, and also drive the core objectives, right? And as I said, we mentioned having that communication platform, and you may not have somebody as a ready CISO, that's fine. But how much of support that is given in terms of the budget, the training, and all of these, and how are you engaging with this individual over a period of time to ensure that you're defining, it's not left to just the individual, but the overall ecosystem of ensuring that the people are provided to him, the support that is provided to him from the leadership, his the view or the ability to for him to come and represent in the board and show, and provide the relevant data points. I think this also makes a very, very important.
No, absolutely agree. I mean, one of the things that we often say at least within Goldman Sachs is, from a board member perspective, competence and capability building is as critical responsibility of the board member as there are multiple other things, obviously. So it's not just the board member consumes things, but obviously he or she has to contribute, and competence and capability building is one of the key contributions that organizations would need. I'll probably move on to The next element, even within the Engage space, is one of the scenarios that we deal with quite often. Probably I'll ask both Samir and Steve. I'll begin with Samir. In terms of typically M&A scenario, when you are acquiring a company, cyber and the due diligence around cyber becomes very important because obviously there is an aspect of culture integration, processes integration, but there is also a cyber related integration as well. And in some cases, the difference between the two organizations may be very vast and integration may be very, very challenging to begin with. So in terms of just practices as a board member, what would be 3-4 things that you would flag as, okay, let's do these things at least when you are in a M&A scenario? I'll first come with Samir, and then after him, I'll ask Steve.
Sure, thank you, Ram. Well, it also depends, you're on the buy side or the sell side of this, but assuming for a moment we are on the buy side of it, as a board member, you will get exposed to the details of the company and the potential acquisition. You want to understand what type of culture is there within the organization. Correct? Is in an open, transparent culture within the organization. That is absolutely key. Correct? You want to then look at, from a cyber security perspective specifically, you do a due diligence on the asset, on the potential asset, to see what type of footprint they have on the internet. Correct? Just like you would assess any other business from a business metrics, you'll see what is their footprint on the internet. Have they had any history of past breaches? Do they have key management personnel? Do they have a CISO on board? Do they have a CIO on board? What is their, how long have they been with the organization? Correct? What is their spend on the cybersecurity front as compared to IT spend? What is their compliance posture? So at a business level, you'll start to dig into these. And these comes when you understand your own business well and you've had insights from your own cybersecurity posture. So when you know your business cybersecurity well, I think it becomes so easy for the board member to relate. And then with the support of the CISO or the acquisition team, you can go and ask these questions. Starts with the culture, starts with the footprint, starts with the history of any breaches or compliance, because then that augments your own risk posture. If you have to deal with an acquisition that had numerous breaches, correct, that's not something that you want to take on board. Okay, so I think those are some of the things you'll keep in mind as you look at an M&A situation.
I think Samir has covered most of the point. I think the due diligence piece that he covered is the most important from an overall assessment per se. But if I have to speak about from an integration and really getting to the depth, you first of all need to create a crack team within the organization. The one who understands your business, your systems, your side of the story, and then go on the other side of the fence and then measure what are the deviations against what you are currently following, right? Because that is eventually going to define how smooth your integration is going to be, whether that's going to add the value that you're really looking for towards the integration or no. So having this relevant crack team with subject matter experts, whether it is from security, from IT, financial, non-financial, and then going and assessing it at the broad level is what I would say. Obviously, the CISO plays a big role. It would start from a self-declaration from the organization itself, having a subject matter expert, a Big Four or anybody who's specialized in mergers and acquisition. Again, each of them would have a separate track. Security will be a separate track. IT would be a separate track and all of that, right? And then your team internally was able to bring all of these pieces together and really say that does it really fit or does not fit? And if not, what needs to be done to really make this happen? I think that's I would look at it from a M&A perspective.
Absolutely. I mean, just from personal experience, we have something called as Office of Integration, so which handles all the acquisitions and divestitures. That means if we are selling a particular component of our business, how that goes away is also as important when we acquire. So a particular, in all boards, but we have a board member aligned to this Office of Integration in terms of looking at, are we set up right? Are we setting up the processes for success? What are the typical metrics that he or she wants to see? So absolutely agree with both of you in terms of a crack team, Office of Integration. That's how it will work in terms of cyber due diligence. Probably I'm just watching the time. I'll go to the last component. We looked at understand. How do you understand as a board member? Then we looked at engage. Now the last component, which is monitor. So once you engage, how do you monitor as a board member? What are typical things that you would do? Again, this is an open question for all the three of you, but I'll probably begin with Animesh. In terms of just a general broad guideline in terms of how do you set up a monitoring mechanism for you to have an assurance in terms of your cyber posture, whether the risks are within the threshold, I mean, all those allied things. What are like 2 or 3 most effective things that you have noticed from your perspective? We'll begin with Animesh, and then I'll request both Samir and Steve to add.
Sure, Ram. So my perspective to this is that cybersecurity as such is a journey, right? It's not a Mount Everest that you climb one day and you've achieved it all. It's not going to happen ever. It's a concurrent thing. You keep going at it. So what's very critical as a board member is that you are the one who's taking the decision overall for the organization. The CISO is giving you inputs. You have a roadmap towards your achieving where you want to achieve, point A and then point B, so those milestones. Regularly working with your team on where are you on those milestones? Are we achieving those milestones? What are the gaps? How quickly can we do that? And moving to the next milestone. Very, very critical, right? To do that, you may even have small dashboards which could be periodically updated. Of course, the board member is not going to delve into a lot of nitty-gritties, but you know, having dashboard, it's a very simple thing, but effective, right? You know exactly where the challenges are. And it also helps with a free flow communication, because if they don't see things moving, they also know that there is a challenge with the team and they could aid it. It could be budgetary aid, it could be guidance from Big Fours or anybody, or get in a consultant to help. So that dashboard kind of thing is very, very critical for them to have that oversight. And the other thing is of course, as an industry, you have compliance and regulations, so that anyways form the base of your working. So ensuring that those things are in place. I mean, I'd say these few things.
Sure, thanks. We'll come to the actual metrics, etc., in a bit. But as a general broad structure, if you are a board member and you want an assurance saying that, okay, things are going fine, what would be the 2, 3, 4 things that you would look on a periodic basis?
Well, I know we're at the monitor stage, right? So I'll just sort of extrapolate it, correct? You're looking at effectiveness of the board governance.
Correct.
Correct? So you can assess that. There are services available to assess the board's effectiveness. It can be done internally, but it can also be done externally, seeing how effective is the board. Correct? And the things, you look at various things and almost summarizes what we discussed, Ram, is what's the composition of the board. Correct? We start with there. What are the frequency of topics from cyber perspective that have been brought in? Correct? What is the outcome from a board perspective in terms of the strategy in place? There's a resilience in place. What's the relationship of the board with the management and with the CISO to an extent? Correct? So you keep looking at different things. You're assessing the outcomes, but you're also assessing the behavior of a board as a team. Correct? You're also looking at that, saying how are different opinions handled from a cyber perspective at a board level. Correct? So you look at all these different outcomes. Have they been achieved? Look at the behavior to really assess the effectiveness of the board. I'm not sure if I answered this, Ram, but that's sort of a macro view that I take when I look at the board effectiveness.
No, absolutely. The independent assessment of the board itself is a key component of how do you establish governance. In terms of if you are doing certain things, is it right? Is it in line with the peers? Is it in line with the best practices? It's important to assess yourself as a board member.
And because more so, I think there's so much pressure on the board as well to know so many different things. And earlier, board used to be just focused on the organization. Now they are focused externally in terms of shareholder activism. So they're answerable from a shareholder perspective, they're answerable to the regulators. So that scrutiny helps when someone outside comes in to assess the board performance. I think that really helps.
Yeah, somebody is really liking your answer. Yeah. Steve, anything you want to add?
I think I'll just add 2 points here. One is the independent assessment. I think you need, that has to be curated in a particular manner. It's just not about what are you, because it's curated towards measuring the ROI and the effectiveness of the investments that have gone. So somebody really coming and doing a simulation exercise, blue team, purple team, red team, to really gauge and say that can the organization from a resilience perspective withstand the cyber attack? From a preparedness perspective, can the organization really go, if it goes down, will it be able to come back not impacting business? That's one side, one part of it. Second point I would say is, while everybody understands the security is responsibility of all, but it's end of the day is the cyber security team or the CISO team which, throws all. So how is the organization bringing together the first line, the second line, and the third line of defense? And how is that bringing out in terms of governance when the board is, meeting not only the security team, but all these three layers, whether it's the audit part, whether the, or even the business piece. How are the KPIs in a way, from a, let's say, from a data security perspective or from a vendor governance perspective, how are these segregated from across these three lines, right? The first line, second line, and third line. And are you getting a similar message is what I would try to put across.
No, agree. So now, the most cliched component of any CISO's day life is metrics. In terms of assurance to the board, what would be typically the metrics that, or first of all, what approach you would take to the metrics? Because cybersecurity and CISOs drown in metrics and get other people drowned as well in certain cases. So what would be top 3-4 things that at a board level would make sense in terms of presenting to the board? And you touched upon it a few minutes back in terms of what type of agenda items come into the board and what kind of articulation makes sense for the board members. So just continuing on that, what would be some of the metrics that maybe 1 or 2 would make sense for that particular audience to get an assurance?
I think there are a few, and varies in terms of what stage of cybersecurity journey you are in. So you could absolutely bring to the board members. One is any action points you've committed at the previous board meeting. So bring them at the next board meeting. But also your cybersecurity program, correct? Where is it? At what stage is it? Is something you want to expose to the board. If there has been an incident recently, you want to bring that in to the board meeting saying, if it's an external incident, saying this is what happened with a competitor of ours, and this is why it wouldn't happen to us because we have these things in place. If it's an internal incident that happened within the organization, you obviously want to give the board a briefing on what went wrong, how are we going to address it going forth. Correct? And then you want to go into, then you can go into different metrics. You can put in from and map them to the business process is what I'll say. Instead of giving vulnerability stats or recovery stats, I would say for each business process. If I say this particular banking or net banking application has so many anomalies or vulnerabilities sitting on it, I think that resonates better with the board than something in isolation. So I think I would say these few things really cut it for me.
Agree. Steve, would you want to add?
Ram, you're right. I think one of the most, challenging task for a CISO is to convert those technical jargons into a very simple language which the board understands because they're used to see the financial metrics and all of that, right? So it's very important. Also, secondly, important is how do you ensure that these metrics are more forward-looking and just not representing that you're addressing the risk of yesterday, right? That's very, very important. If I have to call out some of the few or key metrics, I would start with the key hygiene factors. Most of the breaches you've learned from is the hygiene factors have gone wrong. The patching was not there. End-of-life systems were still there. The vulnerability management program was, there's way from what you out to be. So I would start with the key hygiene factors first. Second, I would say is in today's context, again, we touched upon this point earlier, is the regulatory requirements, right? It can have a direct impact on the organization. So with the changing landscape, from a compliance perspective, how are you really, what's your compliance status against your own policies, the regulatory guidelines or the standards that you've adopted? More importantly, if there is non-conformance, how are you addressing this non-confidence? What's your plan? I think that needs to come to the board. Uh, uh, from an investment perspective, I think so, there's a lot of talk about cyber risk quantification. I think it's early stages, but measuring in some shape and form, how is your ROI from an effectiveness perspective? I think that's another part. Security Operations Center, irrespective of what you've done, the investments that you've done, security operations and the metrics around security operations very, very important. Are there any incidents? What's your capability? Whether it's a real incident or a simulation that you've done, or typical standard security operation practices, what is your detection percentage and what is your response time? I think that's a very, very important metric to represent to the board. We spoke about culture. How do you measure people culture or posture culture in your organization? How much of those detections of the phishing simulations, spear phishing, targeted simulations for departments that you've done, training, again, most wanted, people do not follow that, but end of the day, it does matter, right? What is the adoption percentage? What is the effectiveness percentage of the training? I think many organizations who are serious about it go all the way till ensuring that, things are, the employees are pulled up for not taking those awareness things. And at the end of the day, we all know the human is the weakest change, right? Your technology, your processes will not work if these things are not. Identity is another area, another risk that is evolving. I think metrics around identity. What are your privilege IDs? What are your sensitive applications are behind those PIM and DAM and all the other investments that you've done? Lastly, I would talk about the cyber resilience, right? Again, we spoke about it. Do you have the simulations done in terms of red team, blue team? Is it independent third party done the assessment for you? Have you tried to reach your golden, your jewels, and what was the outcome of it? You have your BCP and DR that is created. You have BIAs created. Are you in a position to test those, to conduct your BCP and DR to measure a BIA outcome that you've defined in RPO? And specifically in today's world, in terms of interconnected, you are dependent, whether it is for network or for some service with a third party. Is the organization in a position to carry out some of these DR drills along with your third parties, right? Today, some of the regulators mandate certain mandates doing cyber drills for some of the organizations. So these are some of the data points I would say, and eventually, again, initially we touched upon the strategy. You said you build up a 3-year roadmap against a well-known framework. Where do you stand in terms of the framework, right? Representing that and then aligning the rest of the metrics to that overall framework is very, very important.
Just to add to what Steve just mentioned, right? Reiterating the same thing. SOC becomes your centerpiece of your defense and know how what's going on in the organization. You've invested a lot of money, but as a board, do you have a visibility on your MTTR, which is mean time to respond, mean time to detect, and mean time to respond, which is very critical in situations, right? So having some understanding of what is your MTTR and MTTD is going to give you a perspective that is your investment going in the right direction. Otherwise, you're just buying technology and tools, but you're not still resilient there.
Yeah, no, I agree with all. Just one more addition to that is our third-party reliance, and what is the concentration risk in terms of our core business processes, where we have completely relying on a vendor or maybe a couple of vendors, and if they have a problem, what's the risk to the firm? I think from a third-party point of view, it's a key metric to come. Which business processes have concentration risk? I see there's only a couple of minutes left. If there are questions, we can attempt to answer them. Please. Can we get a mic? No. Okay.
So as part of the board members, there are risks not only related not only related to the CISO's team, the risk lies with the data center, the risk lies with the cloud service provider which you are having, the risk also lies with the third-party vendors, third-party consultants who, consult with the right kind of OEM service providers, and there are many contracts which you also enter into all these network service providers with your cloud service providers and all the peripheral people or in the organizations who are supporting in building and running this entire digital services in the respective banks or insurance companies. So if anything goes wrong, who will finally bear the financial loss? Whether you will be able to recover that from your cloud service provider or from a third-party consultant or from your OEM service providers, or the banks or the respective financial institution is going to write it off in their books. So if a board member wanted to know that, what are the legal channel through which the establishment of the fault can be, that this is the organization, there was the gross negligence, or this is the organization who has promised this but not delivered this, or it is my organization who has not completely addressed, or the adequate controls were not implemented to the risk which were there in the organization. So who has got the expertise to identify the entire gamut and understand, okay, now this is the quantification of the amount of loss which this organization has to bear. So are we going to do with the normal litigation channel which is available in India, or we want to do it other way?
Yeah, probably I'll begin with a couple of points and then you can add. Couple of things in terms of how do we ensure this. One is through contracting. There are a lot of, is it legal through the legal channel, as you said? Absolutely. If somebody is not meeting their SLAs and your business is depending on those SLAs being met, so there is a clear business impact. So you frame the contract in terms of if there is more than three breaches of contract SLAs within a particular time frame, then these are the penalty clauses. That's how one of the things that we look. Second, obviously, time-tested it's insurance purely from a cyber point of view, cyber insurance. If there is a breach, and if we are affected, and hence our business is affected, what is our cyber? I mean, it's a area of discussion by itself. But in terms of how do we look at insurance premiums, how do we look at what we can recover from that is another aspect of how do we look at recovery, so to speak. And I'll let my colleagues add to that.
So, but insurance companies also do not, upfront say, okay, this is a $1 million breach, so we'll pay 1 million. It is not the case, right? They also assess it in detail and understand where was
it has to go through an evaluation again
Yes.
in terms of what cost that is attributed. It also depends on what are the existing controls, like typical parallels of if you want to insure somebody, if you are already sick, if you already have a terminal disease, obviously your premium goes up. Similarly, if you are not following certain controls, what is your control standards? If you are following, I'm just throwing an example, ISO, if you are following NIST, so there are absolutely cases where there is an evaluation of what is your control structure, and hence your premium is like this. So that is how you arrive at. It is not like you determine or I determine. It has to be through a process. Generally, both parties agree to an independent model before they sign that.
Just from an insurance perspective, just to add that there is, from an insurance angle, there is a cap. You have a policy for a particular cap. Within that, there'll be various segments in it. Business interruption, there are a lot of components within it. From a number per se, if an event or a breach has to happen, it's an engagement that the insurance company would have, the insured would have, and a third-party organization who's involved in doing the entire assessment, what really went wrong, at which level, and what was the disruption, what are the expense really. So there's no direct number, but from an insurance angle, you have a coverage that you have taken, and As Ram covered, your premium would vary based on what industry you are, what is your risk posture that you carry, what is the integrations that you have, what are the dependencies that you have in an organization, and obviously what are the, the coverages that you have, what are the specifications. There will not be two organizations, even in the same sector, necessarily having the same insurance coverage document or the premium or the sum assured.
Okay, I think before our mics get switched off, I think we should close. Thank you everybody for your patience through this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to our panelists for a really insightful and comprehensive discussion.